Are you looking to get into horror for the first time, or maybe just looking for a new book to read this spooky season? I got some books. Let's talk about them. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about 9 horror books that will get you hooked on the genre forever, or at least help you find a new read this spooky season. The very first book that I want to talk about today is a book that's 128 years old and you're probably very familiar with, and that book is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now this is a book that I read as a teenager and then reread a few years ago with a brand new appreciation. And guys, I didn't remember how fun this book is to read. Jonathan Harker is the main character that you're following in Dracula, and he's on his way to Transylvania as a lawyer to help Dracula purchase property in London. Unfortunately, once he goes into the castle, Jonathan's not allowed out and things start to spiral as he tries to figure out what the hell is going on. Dracula is written as a collection of letters that are written back and forth between a few different characters. And there's even a version of Dracula called Dracula Daily, which you can actually get sent to you by email, that puts all the letters in chronological order and is really fun to read that way as well. Now, you wouldn't think a book written 128 years ago would be necessarily fun, but the way that these characters are written, the kind of spiral that Jonathan goes through and the letters that are kind of like within the book, the way that it's told, hold up really well. And I even feel like maybe there's a little something between Jonathan and Dracula, if I'm being honest. This is the OG Dracula, the OG Bloodsucker. If you've seen any of the movies, they've got nothing on the actual book. Highly recommend it. Grab a copy, super easy to find, a great place to start with horror, and just a great next book to read if you haven't already. The next book I want to talk about is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This book really goes to show how fun horror can be, and how much there still is to play with and do with the haunted house trope. This book follows our main character Louise and her brother. After tragedy strikes, their parents pass away and they have to try and figure out together how to sell the house and how to split everything up. But as always with a haunted house book, not everything is as it seems. Her late mother was a puppet maker, and let's just say things start to go awry and get real spooky real fast. Part haunted house story, part family drama, 100% really fun. Could not recommend it more. If you haven't picked up one of his books before, I think this is a great place to start. But also if you're just new to horror as a genre, great, fun, easy entry. Highly recommend. Now, the third book on my list is actually a collection of short stories, and I've got to be honest with you, I'm not a short stories collection kind of guy. I don't read very much of them. They're never really something that draws me in. I like to be able to sit down and spend a lot of time with a book, though I do have some short stories that really have stood out to me over the years. When this one was sent to me as an ARC many years ago, I decided to give it a read just because it was sent to me, and I honestly fell in love with it. It's so cool. They're all very interconnected within a theme, and that book is Strange Weather by Joe Hill. Now, this is basically 4 novellas that really, I think, show off Joe Hill's versatility as an author and as a horror writer. I don't want to give too much away with these ones, but I will say that the stories within are creepy, clever, and there's even a story about killer rain. If you haven't read Joe Hill before, absolute great place to start. If you're new to horror and looking to ease your way in with some shorter stories, also a great place to start. But even if you are a Joe Hill fan and just haven't gotten to this yet, I highly recommend you pick it up this Halloween and treat yourself to something nice. The next book that I want to talk about is definitely related to Joe Hill and an absolute classic that you might already be aware of, and that book is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. First of all, I absolutely love this version and I love this cover, which is why I always have it displayed on the shelf behind me, even if I didn't absolutely love this book the way some other people did. When I first read this a couple years ago, I ended up giving it, I think, 3 or 3.5 stars, and that's because I thought it was a good book. I did enjoy my time with the book. It just didn't blow me away the way it has for some other people. That being said, Pet Sematary is a very quick read, a really good first entry into Stephen King and into horror as a genre, and I would say a must-read book for any fan of Stephen King who hasn't gotten to it yet. If you don't know, Pet Sematary is about a family who moves into a house, and just off of the property is a children's pet cemetery. The cemetery has a bit of a reputation for things being buried in it and then coming back not quite as they should be, and the story plays with that theme and the theme of grief like no other. So like I said, while it may not be my favorite Stephen King book of all time, it is a lot of other people's, and I still think a great place to start for new horror fans. The next book I want to talk about is a book that I unfortunately don't have a copy of on me, and that book is Nathaniel by John Saul. I personally think that John Saul is an underrated and underappreciated author in the horror space. When I was a kid growing up, my mom had a lot of John Saul books on her shelf, and I was always asking if I could read them. The answer was always when you're older, when you're older. And then when I was older and was finally allowed to sneak one of those books away and read them, I was kind of blown away. So that was my first introduction to horror as a genre, and maybe why that author in particular has stuck with me the way that he has. I've read the vast majority of his books, and when I say he, I should really say them, as John Saul was the pen name of John Saul and his husband. As they wrote a lot of their books, came up with ideas together. Now, John Saul and his husband have since retired, but there's a nice big back catalog of books. A lot of them have recurring themes of the paranormal and spooky kids. They're all pretty short reads. Nathaniel is one of my favorites, as it's one of those small town evil tales that really gets under your skin skin and has a really good creep factor, especially around Halloween. So I think it's a good place to start for horror fans, as it's where I started as a horror fan. If you haven't read any of his work before, I definitely recommend at least giving it a shot. Next, I want to talk about some folk horror. I picked up my very first book by this author last year, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully reading some more. This particular one is witchy, folky, and beautifully illustrated, and that's Slewfoot by Brom. This is set in colonial New England after an ancient evil spirit is awakened in the dark woods. It's very much got Witcher vibes and deals with a main character who's accused of being a witch and her less than savory friend. It's another standalone that's a super quick read, really easy to fly through. Absolute perfect spooky season vibes, bar none. And if there's any book on this list that I recommend owning a physical copy of, just for the illustrations alone, it's Slewfoot. Next on the list is an author I have talked about before on this channel and I don't think gets enough love on BookTube. This particular book was my first book by him, and that's Hater by David Moody. The best way that I can describe Hater is zombies without zombies. Essentially, a paranoia plague overtakes people where they're still alive, they're still human beings, but they're overcome with an overwhelming urge to kill and hate the people who were not affected by this paranoia plague. So all of a sudden, half of society turns on each other and it affects everyone, whether young or old. The most interesting thing about these books is that it's a series of 2 trilogies. So the first trilogy deals with kind of the perspective of all of the events that unfold from one side of the coin. And then the second later trilogy, which is just as good, deals with the same series of events from start to finish, but from the other perspective. You've got paranoia, mob mentality, zombies without zombies, and the horror of people turning on each other and how society would deal with that collapse. Really interesting book from a really interesting author. Another great place to start, or a great new author to pick up if you're already a fan of the genre. Now, the next book on my list I picked up just because it had a gorgeous cover, and it's more of a gothic thriller than it is a horror novel, and that book is The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This book follows a home health aide or a caretaker who is tasked with taking care of an old lady in a haunted, decrepit house on a hill who everyone believes had killed their family. It's basically what would you do if you were tasked with taking care of Lizzie Borden. Something that Riley Sager does really well with this book is proving that horror doesn't necessarily need monsters in order to keep you hooked and on the edge of your seat. You also kind of get to go through this story with the main character and try and figure out and piece it together as you go. I was able to piece some of it together and felt real proud of myself, but there were still unexpected twists and turns that I did not see coming. Overall, absolutely love this book. I think this kind of gothic thriller is a really good kind of entry point and segue into horror if you want to ease yourself in with something that's a little bit more palatable and quick and easy to read. Now, the last book that I want to talk about is a book that I have talked about previously in another horror video on my channel, The Troop by Nick Cutter. Now, is this the best place for you to start if you are brand new to horror? Like, maybe not, but it is a great place to start if you want to get into extreme horror, or if you're somebody who really just wants to get into horror with something a little bit more fucked up. Now, The Troop by Nick Cutter follows a group of teens as they're on this kind of like Boy Scouts type of camping trip on an island just off of PEI. It's there that they come across an interesting stranger with a parasitic infection that changes their behavior in an interesting way. It's gross, it's horrifying, you'll never look at tapeworms the same way again, and it's not a book that I recommend to read while eating. If that sounds like it's for you and you want something with a little bit more edge to it, then again, awesome place to start. Highly recommended. It is a great book, it's just a little messed up. So there you have it. That is 9 books that I think will hook you on horror forever. They worked for me and hooked me on the genre forever, so maybe they'll work for you too, and maybe you'll even find a new favorite spooky season read along the way. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and which ones you would recommend, and if not, what do you think is a great entry point to horror for people who find this video? If you're interested in other genres and wondering how you can get hooked on those, I have some other videos on my channel for fantasy and sci-fi. And as always, if you're new to the channel, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for making it this far. Please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps our channel. And I also invite you to come and join our Discord community at the link in the description below. I appreciate you. I hope you have a happy Halloween. Reading is a treat, and so am I. Goodbye.